Sam, before we came on, we were just talking about how pretty much exhausted you are after a weekend like this. And it's not like we're not doing heavy lifting. We're not saving lives. But for some reason, the draft process, it's a long time. We've got probably because you get home late and you get all that stuff. So how are you feeling this morning?
Pretty good. And I just want to show for people who are watching the podcast, for people who are listening, I'm holding up a sheet of paper that says "Reserved for Slacker Sam" that Keim put on my chair at the media annex opened at 11 a.m. on Saturday for day three, and I walked in at 11:07, and Keim had already, football guy, hardo, put that on my chair. So I think that I'm tired because the expectation was if you're 7 minutes late, you're slacking.
I mean, you got to call it like it is, Sam. Sorry, but it was funny because I was kind of hoping you come up a little bit later. But anyways, we're not doing anything other than following the draft. And there's a lot going on with the draft. So I am curious, we'll start with this, like your general impressions of their draft.
Yeah, I think my number one takeaway was 7 out of 8 of the players being seniors, several of them being redshirt seniors. There's no Jamin Davis or Antonio Gibson or Sadiq Charles. There's none of those, hey, this guy does not come in clear packaging. This guy is going to need a lot of development to get where they want him to go. A lot of these guys, I think, are pretty they're close to what they're going to be. They might not be high ceiling, but they do seem to be high floor. Because I do like a lot of these guys, even though I think that people were questioning where they took them. Phidarian Mathis, the defensive tackle, Brian Robinson Jr., the running back, they have clearly defined roles. They have cracks that they will fill in this roster, possibly Percy, Butler, the safety as well. So to see them kind of transition from taking those a little bit bigger swings to, hey, we're getting 7 out of 8 guys that are 22, 23, 24 years old. These guys are going to fill in. That was a pretty notable shift to me.
So let's go down that road. First of all, one of the things I wonder with this draft, because before this draft, I'm sure like you, one of the things you heard is people are going to have wildly different boards. That was consistent with what I heard. And I think it showed up in how others perceived what they did and what they end up doing. But I also wonder with those seniors and how much of that is a function of what they're looking for, do you think, versus the COVID year, the pandemic year, which pushed a lot of these guys. Maybe they would have come out a year before. Now they go back and they're a little bit more proven. But I wonder how much is a function of that as well.
Yeah, I think that certainly it's probably both. And you saw a lot of people go around the board. The Patriots drafting that Baylor receiver Tyquan Thornton way ahead of time sticks out to me as well. I mean, boards being different, I think, happens every year. But to me, it wasn't a, hey, we're going to do this for the first few rounds. This seemed to be
it was a definite
an organizing philosophy. And I know that when you asked Ron, hey, considering where your roster's at, was this a focus? He kind of downplayed it, but it seems to me like the proof is in the pudding. The only underclassman they took was Sam Howell, the quarterback. And so I guess to me, it definitely seemed more of a theme and more of a shift than a coincidence.
So why do you think that, and I think the easy assumption is he's made a big deal out of going into year 3. And this has to be the year you elevate. How much of it is that versus something else?
The question of this offseason is Carson Wentz closer to the quarterback they think he is, or is he closer to the quarterback most other people think that he is? And so what I took away from this draft is whether it be Jahan Dotson or Cole Turner or some of these guys that come in and have obvious skill sets, have obvious contributions, and could be expected to step in right away, is they want to give him the highest chance that he can to be the quarterback that they think he is. Ron talked about Jahan Dotson's interior route running, the 50-50 balls, the position flex of this year, if you will, the hot buzzword has been catch radius with Cole Turner and Jahan Dotson. So I think this is, most of this. Brian Robinson obviously fits that short yardage back that Peyton Barber was, and Ron said that, depending on game flow, they could lean on him and not AG because AG is more of a slasher. So to me, this is all about maximizing Carson's chance of being that quarterback.
Sure. And I think you talk about too, the one thing you heard about Dotson that I heard a few times, most pro ready. They felt like he and Olave were the most pro ready receivers. And it's not like Dotson went, 16th overall. And I think in talking to some people close to him, they thought like maybe in that 19 to 30 range. So you're only talking like, if you think that you're going to go around there, well, it's not, is it as big a stretch as people made it seem to be? I don't know about that. I always thought he'd be in that around 20. So is 4 or 5 spots, I don't know, but they do like him. And they, again, most pro ready. And then the wide catch radius is the other thing that they talk, like you said, talk about with him and with Turner. And I think with Wentz, that's important because, again, I've talked about this, but he's not the most pinpoint guy. He's not going to, like, if it calls to stick it on your left shoulder every time, it's going to be here, it's going to be here. And you want someone who has that ability. And then I think the third thing is that you talk about with Dotson, the interior stuff. You go back last year and, like, again, God bless Taylor Heineke for how he played. It was good and all that. And I always hate knocking him because I admire what he's done. But one of the areas that was weak was over the middle, especially with the inside receiver. And I think when you lose Logan, it's there. Adam Humphries had one catch between the hashes. One. That's where he's supposed to operate best. So can Dotson then, the combination of Dotson and Wentz, be more effective in that area? And I think that's something else to consider as well.
Absolutely. And I know that throwing over the middle is something that, shorter quarterbacks have a tough time with. I think that's part of the reason maybe that Malik Willis fell, because he's 6 foot, but with Carson Wentz at 6'4", I think the field becomes more open to you. It becomes more open to Scott Turner. And so, you have to have those targets, whether it be Cole Turner, whether it be Jahan Dotson, whether it be Dax Milne, some of these, options or Terry on inside routes. Like, you have to be able to use the whole field. And I think that I think that this draft has really been a byproduct of that.
And then did you like the trade back?
I love the trade back. I wrote, a story before the draft about trade charts and about how often, that Jimmy Johnson chart, would teams use a tweaked version of it, and oftentimes the tweak is that the first round picks are lower in value. Basically, the Jimmy Johnson chart, it declines much slower in value than the Johnson chart does. The Johnson chart falls right off a cliff,
right?
From 3,000 at pick 1 to 590 at pick 32. It goes a lot slower than that. And so, to me, I don't think the difference between Olave and Dotson is more than having 3 extra picks because they take that, 120 and they flip it into 2/5. So really, you're talking about trading, at least in Washington's perspective, Chris Olave for Jahan Dotson, Sam Howell, and Cole Turner.
Right.
And so to me, that's tremendous. And Brian Robinson as well. So that's tremendous value. And I don't think, one rookie receiver, the gap is that big.
And I don't think I loved watching Chris Olave in college. I don't think the gap is big enough where you don't make that trade. I think if Drake London is there, they would not have made that trade, because I also think that London would have given them something they didn't have as far as the size goes. So with Dotson, you're like, okay, there's a few guys that could be there at 16 that they like, including Dotson. So yeah, I agree with that. And the other thing, it's funny because I know, again, people weren't thrilled. Tom McShay listed him as one of his favorite pick for Washington because he feels he can make an instant impact in that offense. How big an impact do you think he might be able to make?
Dotson.
Yes.
Yeah, I think pretty big, just because assuming there's a lot of assumptions that you got to make in May, but let's assume that Curtis Samuel is healthy and that they have
it's a big one.
Yeah,
I think it will be. I think he will be, but who knows? I mean,
right. Let's assume they have their full offensive complement back. I know Logan Thomas is also a question, but if you're doing it right, I think that Jahan Dotson and his pro readiness over the middle, I think you'll see that right away. And because then when you have a quarterback that can make all the throws, when you have the route tree open up, when you can throw between the numbers and be more of a threat, I think you'll see the offense take on a different hue, and it'll be more productive. Obviously, last year, you just Taylor Heineke every time he had to throw deep. Again, like you said, like not to knock the guy, but all his throws downfield, there wasn't that zip on him that made the defenses, I think, respect him in the same way. So while Carson Wentz isn't going to be the most accurate, he's certainly going to get the ball there. And when you're talking about the ways that you can threaten a defense and forcing the defense to respect you, I think that Jahan Dotson being a part of that contingent, I can see him stepping in right away.
Now let's get some other picks too. Phidarian Mathis. Now I like the guy for a couple of reasons, because he's a personality. He was fun to talk to. So for us, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk to him. I know that there was what he said about where he thought he would go, late third, maybe fourth. And I know, like, then you hear from the agents, like, well, she was managing expectations. And I think even Rivera said that. Then I hear from another agent who's like, well, based on the teams I talked to, here's a chart I compiled, and he had him in the third round. So, okay. So, if he's a reach or not. What did you think of that pick? I will say this, after watching him, I think the guy's going to help. Whatever round he was picked in, I think he's going to help. But what did you think of that one?
I think there's two conversations we can have here. And the first is the idea of a reach, right? Which
Right.
I think people were talking about all weekend with the Patriots and Cole Strange, the guard out of Chattanooga. And Kyle Shanahan actually said an interesting thing last night during his press conference, which was it really only takes one guy to set that value. And if you really feel like that guy is so important to you, you got to take him a round ahead of time or maybe earlier, because and I'm not saying that drafting a guard in the first round is good positional value, but I do think that a lot of times, I was talking to Brandon Beane, the Bills GM, before the draft, and he said, I think even more than fans or media realize, boards in different team facilities are wildly different.
Correct.
And so I think that's really important.
After the draft too. Martin Mayhew said that after the draft.
Right. No, that's a good point. And so for, I guess the idea of a reach football team building is highly contextual, different timelines and everything. So I get why some of those things happen. With Phidarian Mathis, while, he does seem like a reach, I agree with you. Like, it seems like, he's really good at two-gapping, stopping the run. He has that traditional size. I don't know. I know that they said Martin Mayhew said he had sneaky pass rush ability because he had 9 sacks last year. I guess I'm not as sold on that, just having looked into it a little bit initially. But obviously, when you're talking about an Alabama guy that can come in and play here, I think that he'll serve that role that they need him to with Ioannidis and Settle down.
I think, and the thing that I look at with him is, for the pass rushes, if you're going to draft an interior lineman higher, he needs to have some level of that. And it's why that I wasn't sold on them drafting Payne where they did a few years ago, because I didn't know if he would have that. And he's not a great pass rusher. He can do it, but he's not a great pass rusher. With Mathis, the one thing that, you do worry about that, but the one thing I really like from him is that he can occupy blockers. And with these linebackers, like, that's one thing that I know there's with some of the defensive players, like, that's one of the things that they talk about, is they need a guy who can do that. And Payne, while he's been playing those, which others don't, it's not his best area. This allows him to then, when he's there, to play somewhere else and let Mathis play there. So I think there's that's why I say there is value there, a hidden value that a lot of fans aren't going to see, because they see, oh, you lost Settle, you lost Ioannidis. Well, this guy does something different than those guys did. I still think they should have kept Settle. I wish they had found a way to do that, knowing that they're going to release Ioannidis. But I think this guy gives you something you didn't have. And so I think that's important to know too. And the other thing is too, Sam, that you hear like, oh, are these guys even there to start? Well, they're all going to play, and they're going to play a good amount, and so that's the one thing. The other thing I want to talk about too, along with that theory, is the impact guys aren't necessarily going to be the ones they just drafted for next year. The guys who have to make the impact are Chase Young, Montez Sweat. Those are the guys that have to come through for next year, even more so than these draft picks, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think listening to I think GMs around the league have always said this, but particularly the Rams. I mean, when they traded for all those guys last year, they said, look, it doesn't matter. Like if our quarterback or Jalen Ramsey or any of our pillar players get hurt, depth is great. There's that old saying, depth is great until you have to use it, right? And so to me, it's like your stars, your studs. This team, if it wins, if it's going to be a successful team, it's going to be because Carson Wentz and Chase Young, and Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas, if he comes back healthy. It's going to be those stars. It's going to be those pillars carrying the team. And then, like we said at the top, like these guys are going to fill in. These guys are going to play their roles as a part of that to maximize those guys. But make no mistake, if this team is to win the division, if this team is to go to the playoffs, it'll be on the backs of those stars.
Right. And the other one too, with Robinson too, with Gibson, first of all, again, he does give you something that, again, they didn't have. They needed to have that other back. I think we all knew that they were looking at backs because they had some in that they liked. And maybe it was a little bit higher than where I thought he would go, where I thought they would pick one. Again, he gives them something they have. And the other part is too, Sam, Gibson early in the year last year, the first half of the year, had those fumble issues. And they really couldn't take him out because nobody else could really go in and fill that full-time role. I wonder if that didn't come up, but I wonder if that's not part of the thinking that, if something happens, now you have a guy who could be more full-time.
Yeah. And I think, them not expecting to lose Peyton Barber in that role when Vegas, claimed him last year, I think that really accentuated how much they miss him, especially if you're going to, if you're going to adapt a receiver like AG into the backfield and he doesn't maybe bring that physicality, and they praise him running behind his pads in that Tampa Bay game and during that stretch where they had, but I think when you looked at his usage, you said, okay, this probably isn't sustainable. So for them to have, and obviously most running back positions in the NFL today are committees. So I totally agree with you. That had to be a part of their thinking. And I think this probably doesn't spell good things for Jarrett Patterson, but when you're talking about going forward, the skills in this running back room, those three, Ron Rivera called it a trifecta. I think that does position you nicely, and you feel pretty good about where that position's at.
Well, and I think that's a good point too. And like with Patterson, you can put him on the practice squad. And again, another good story, but if you lose him, you can find Jarrett Patterson.
Right.
And that's something that it's harder to find the big guys who can run hard and move the pile. And I like what Jarrett did, but I think they clearly needed another guy because you'd hear from people too. Again, they need to give Antonio some help. And so now you have it, 17-game season. That's important. And the other thing that Ron brought, I know people love when Carolina gets mentioned, but he did have a two-headed monster at running back for a while in Carolina that was successful. Does it signal how they want to go about things this season, do you think?
Yeah, I think that I think that obviously, it's still predicated on Wentz. You don't want to be the rushing attack that you were for that 4-game win streak in the middle of the year, starting with Tampa Bay, but because you want to be able to throw it deep, and I think Scott Turner's offense still hasn't, because of the quarterback instability, hasn't been able to kind of show how he really wants to play it. But I think that if you can't win or you get that lead throwing, you want to be an effective rushing team, which obviously this offensive line, while there are a few new pieces, I think, it would make sense if they were still very good running the ball next year. So I think this is just allowing you to win different ways, to prepare for different styles of games. So even though I think Carson Wentz is still your guy, and I think an important thing to point out here is Carson Wentz is a high variance quarterback. He has those really great games like against Arizona last year, but he has those really poor games against Jacksonville at the end of the year. So this to me is even sort of a hedge against that, because if he is not on that day, you have another way, an effective way to run the ball, another form of offense that you could try to lean on.
And I think a good offense is one that can win in multiple ways. And now you also have with Dotson the ability to throw 4 receiver sets out there with effective receivers. You can put 4 guys out there. It doesn't make it a good 4 receiver set. It just means you have 4 guys out there. And But now you can do it with if Samuel's healthy, if De'Ami Brown, or you throw Cam Sims in there. I don't care. Like I always like Cam Sims. So you can do that. The other thing that came up too, physical, tough. We heard those words a few times in the post presser yesterday too. And what did and they, I think somebody even asked, like, does that mean you weren't tough enough? I was like, well, no, but you always want to get tougher.
Yeah, and I think that kind of fits in with what we saw the NFC East do as a whole, right? Like in the first round, before Washington even picked, the Giants and the Eagles had drafted 3 players, and the smallest of them was Kayvon Thibodeau,
Right.
who is like I think 6'5" and 260 because you had that big tackle in New York and Jordan Davis in Philly. So I mean, the NFC East got bigger and badder during the draft, and so to me, this was Washington's counter move. This was Washington, responding to that and saying, hey, if this is going to be a brawl, we're going to be ready.
And one of the tough guys that they mentioned is the safety, Percy Butler, and like he's a guy that I'm actually curious to see how he plays, because it's not like there's a lot of film with Louisiana out there, but he is a guy that they seem to really like. And they brought I think that was they mentioned physical and tough with him a few times.
They did, which was interesting because he was a 3-year starter at free safety, and I feel like you hear physical and tough about box safeties a lot, but not the center fielder too often. And
right.
For them to like him as much as they do, for Ron to say, hey, he could step in at Buffalo nickel as a rookie, he could compete there. That to me is a really interesting sentiment. Some people have I think said on Twitter, isn't he too small? He's 6 foot 194. Listed at the combine. And to me, I mean, he's not that much smaller than Cam Curl, 6'2", 198. And Cam Curl, I think, broke out and kind of showed, hey, you can trust me out here in the Buffalo nickel position in early 2020. So to me, he's a candidate for sure. I don't think I would be surprised if we got to training camp with this as the rotation. I think they'll probably look to try to add somebody else, but for them to even put his name in that conversation, I think was that was notable to me.
It was, and I think part of it too is, and they even said they can adapt that position to the strengths of the guy they have. And I think to me, one of the things you have to have there is somebody who's a smart player, because you have to handle multiple roles. And then within that frame, you can then gear it toward what that guy's with, because it may be that he's better covering the slot. Now you have a physical guy in the slot, things like that. So you can gear it around there, but it also gives you, if you have Curl and Butler out there along with McCain, now you can mix and match those two. So maybe they both don't, someone doesn't have to take all the pounding down there and make it. So I think it gives them some flexibility. But yeah, I don't know that that's a settled spot. Just like with linebacker, I mean, they still need to do some things there because they haven't really addressed that to the level. And that's why there were some spots, even with Mathis or with Robinson, there's some other guys there that are, Troy Anderson or some other players there, that Brisker, that could have then filled specific roles. But I think Mathis fills a needed role for them as well, that maybe people don't realize how important that was, but I think he does. So that's why I think these guys are filling specific areas, which it also tells you, Sam, that it's why they had to trade back, because they did have multiple areas they needed to fill. They may not be these glamorous spots, but they needed all these types of guys to fill.
Absolutely. And I think linebacker is something that I definitely still think they need to address. And I'm curious because Ron has mentioned, I'm thinking back to all the questions I wanted to ask, that I didn't ask yesterday that we should have, but he talked about Cole Holcomb possibly playing Mike. Like, do they still see that as a viable option? Or will they try to do something else? I know there are some guys out there. Joe Schobert is one of them, but to me, it's what is the plan here? Are there going to be veteran cuts after the draft like there were last year? Do they see the Bobby McCain, Charles Leno period as like a viable way to plan on, building the team again? I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but it was I'm curious to hear if they think that is a thing they can bet on, because it does feel like, they're not done.
And they better not be, because they still have things. And even again, the Buffalo nickel you brought up, I mean, I think this is one of the things that after the draft, typically teams will meet on a Monday and go over now what do you have to go get? So would they go back after a Landon Collins to see, okay, now that the draft is over, would you want to come back for this amount? And I don't know that he would, but those are the things that will get discussed. So there's still ways that you can address problems or holes, but linebacker, because like it's not just that they need an inside linebacker or someone else, they don't have a lot of depth there. That to me is one of the, so that you need multiple guys there.
Right. And one more point on this Buffalo nickel. Last year when Landon and Cam and Bobby were all on the field at the same time, Cam, stressed last year that is when he thought the defense was at its best, when they were disguising coverages. And he pointed to that first Tom Brady interception as a good example of Brady had a hard time getting a handle on who was going to drop where and what coverages they were playing. And he really attributed that to how the defense was able to kind of help the offense running the ball, controlling the ball, pull off that upset. And the advanced numbers, expected points added, it really supports that they were much better against the pass with those three on the field. So I think, asking Percy Butler to have the savvy of Landon Collins in year one is probably not going to happen. But if you have that three safety setup, if you can kind of do the mix and match disguise coverages that you got with those three, I think that would be, really valuable moving forward.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's an important point. And they know how effective they were when the three safety set, specifically with Landon, because of the other thing is, again, you have to be really smart because you can't just put anybody back there. Now, I do think like if you get a certain linebacker, another linebacker, something like that, you might be able to able to put Cole Holcomb in a role, not the same as Landon, but in a big nickel role because he's got athleticism, he's smart. But again, you have to tailor it to that talent. But I think along those lines, Sam, and some numbers, in the first 4 weeks of the season last year, they were like almost dead last in yards, points allowed. That 8-week stretch where they started, Landon was more in that role, and before the COVID and injuries all hit, for the next 8 weeks, they were right around the top 10 in those same categories against really good quarterbacks. And I'm glad you brought up the Brady stuff because you could see it. Going back once again, you can see my first read is here. Oh, I can't go there. I wasn't expecting that. That's how you create big plays when you do that. And that's, and that is a credit to them. So that is why that role is important. And it's why you need to get somebody there who is smart and can handle it.
And if you can't find that guy, or let's say, the rest of the offseason, let's say worst case scenario, they can't find that guy. They have to adapt it. They have to shift, hey, here's how we're going to cover that up. We're going to have Cole play, in this role. And I remember, I think it was before Las Vegas when Landon was out and they had Khaleke Hudson playing that for a couple quarters before he got hurt. And Cole was talking about when they had to shift the defensive structure. And I think it was Khaleke for a part of it and DeShazer. They kind of used those two guys to replace Landon. How, you can overcome that, but you have to have a good communicator in the middle. And I know Ron said something that, Cole was not as strong at was communicating. It was not a strength of his going in. So to me, it's if you have to, sacrifice a Buffalo nickel, can your middle linebacker, if it's Cole or if it's someone else, can they be a good communicator enough to get everyone on the same page and get, that defensive structure set up? Obviously, football is endlessly interdependent. And you got to have all those pieces, set up right. But I think that considering they know what those problems are, how do they address fixing them, and which piece can you figure out?
And again, and along with that, like Jamin is not that guy either. Like the communication stuff and all that, I think he needs to be put in somewhere where he doesn't have to feel overloaded. But, and I always go back to this game, the Eagles game, the second one. And I don't say this because I think this guy should be started. That's not the point. But the point is when you have a certain guy with certain traits inside there who can do certain things. And it was when Mayo played the middle and you could see Holcomb freed up to play a certain way. Get somebody better in the middle, but it was the traits that you want to see, like somebody who can play, the one thing they liked that they would talk about with Cole that they really, sometimes you hesitate. So you might see the guy react this way and you hesitate and then the double team gets to you. And whereas if you go fast, a Kuechly type, right, who is a Hall of Famer or will be, but you beat the double team. So either the double team comes off too soon and the tackle wins, or you beat it. And too often they weren't doing that. It was too much. I think I see this. Oh, I see this. Oh, now I go. But when Mayo was in, they actually played the run well against that game because he was decisive. Again, he's not a playmaker. He's a backup, maybe a backup to a backup. But you need that guy. I think it's why you need that guy in the middle when they use those sets, even if it's 2 linebacker sets. You have to have a guy who can play that way because I think it creates problems up front.
Not to have David Mayo catch a stray here. I apologize. Like, he's in the Taylor Heineke vein of he did what he could, stepping in. But
he's a back. He's like Dwight Schrute was an assistant to the regional manager. He's an assistant to the starting linebacker. He's not the starting linebacker. He's not a coach. I get that. That's not the point. It's what he offers. It's what a guy with that type of traits offers. Get someone who's better, please.
Right. Because I was going to say, like, the thing that sticks out to me is the Texas route. I think that the Eagles ran against him where that running back cuts out of the backfield because you need someone who can do what he does against the run, but also defend that route. And I'm hung up on your analogy about the David Mayo is Dwight Schrute, so I'm lost on my point.
Well, it's the way you phrase it, but the point is that, again, I think like. It's why that you want the guy here as a backup. And I think Mayo knows that and they know that. But it's why you've got to get someone in here and Bostic, that's why they kept him around. But they know, or you talked to them throughout the offseason, they know they have to get someone better than Bostic. They still haven't done that yet. So that's got to be a priority. Last topic, the quarterback. They go out and get Sam Howell. And one of the things that Ron did is call Carson Wentz beforehand. What did you like? Do you feel like that was necessary? Like, if they had gone out and gotten Bailey Zappi, do you think that he would have called them, or is it because it's Sam Howell, name guy? And what did you think of that? I thought it was good. I thought it was fine.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. People were comparing this, and when I say people, I mean people on Twitter, eggs. We're comparing this move to the Jalen Hurts move, and I don't think that is the same at all. I mean, Jalen Hurts was a 2nd-round pick. Was a name guy in a way that I don't think Howell was, particularly considering the quarterback class being weak. To me, this was a simple. He's the top-rated guy on your board that's left. I don't know if Washington loved him as much as they said that they did, because Ron said that there was no chance they were picking him in the 4th round, but in the 5th round, you ran the pick in. But I will say that calling Carson Wentz, I think, was necessary, considering, what about him or what people say about him in terms of maybe being a little more sensitive to things. And so, I think that when you have invested and bet as much on this guy as you have to make sure that he is on board, not surprised, not feeling in any way upset by things that you do. So I wasn't surprised they called him. I thought it was a smart move. And they have the same agent, Rep One Sports. So I think that might help a little bit.
Correct.
But I can't imagine if Carson Wentz is upset, he's not that dude.
Right. I could see how he'd get tweaked by a 2nd-round pick in Jalen Hurts. But it's like, wait a minute. And even if you say, oh, it's to help you, he's going to say, like, it's a 2nd-round pick. That 2nd-round picks are brought in at some point to start that. And especially at that position. So you get Sam Howell. I will say, Howell was a name that I heard with them before the draft about the guy. It's not how high he was on their board, but of this quarterback class, that's the one they like. But I also think it's why, because there were some people like, well, why did you go get Carson Wentz? Well, I think when you look at where these quarterbacks are drafted, that's why you went and got Carson Wentz. This is not a great, I think teams where they are drafted is reflective on how teams truly saw this group.
So, interesting question, in my opinion, because weak quarterback class, right? Like, not a great. You took your shot on Russell Wilson, you didn't get him. Would it have been, because Ron has talked about how important year 3 is, right? Seeing that growth, not being in purgatory, with quarterback, finding an answer. Looking back, with retro, the hindsight being 2020, it does seem like Carson Wentz is about as good as they could have hoped for quarterback this offseason. If you're not going to get that top guy, would it have been acceptable, considering that what Carson cost them in terms of picks, in terms of salary cap? Would it have been acceptable for them to punt until next year? The fan base probably, and we probably would have said, you got to take a shot at some point. But looking back, if you said Carson Wentz is the best we can do, we don't think he's a guy that can become a perennial, we don't think he can be a franchise guy in the way that we think. Would it have been acceptable for them to go through this offseason and say, no, it's not the right year, we're doing it next year, even though this is year 3?
I think it's a fair question, because then in that scenario, you're going after Mitch Trubisky and maybe trying, like, and if you don't like these quarterbacks, maybe you go Trubisky and Hall and Heineke and say, we'll roll the dice again next year, because right now it appears to be a stronger draft class. So if nothing else, maybe you don't get the top couple guys, but a good player may fall to you wherever you're at, or maybe you can put yourself in position to go get them. So, I mean, it is a fair question. I do think, though, that they look at year 3 so heavily, and I think they should. Like, you need to generate some excitement with this fan base. You need to start winning at some point, and I think that's why you go out and get Carson Wentz. So I think this is a couple-year deal, and then you reevaluate. That's how I've always viewed it. It's got to be at least a 2-year deal. I'm not buying the 1 year is okay anymore, because you did invest enough that I know financially you can walk away from it, but the 2 picks and the cap space that prevented you or made you do certain moves, it's why it's got to work. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Like, what do you think? Like, I think it's still, I would understand that way too. I kind of like this way better, because I think with Wentz, you get a guy who can play to a certain level. Other ways, the other way too. But what do you think?
Well, you are definitely gaining some certainty in what Carson Wentz is when you trade for him, and I think that's that's a totally defensible position. But I guess, like, what I'm trying to say is, like, year 3 is obviously important for any coach. But if if the circumstances are so fraught, like, could Ron have gone to Dan and said, hey, look, I know that, like, you want to see results. I want to give you results, but just the way things are breaking with this draft class, with this free agent class, even though there's going to be quarterback movement, we are not going to get one of those guys that I can confidently tell you is going to be our franchise guy for, 5-10 years. And because of that, we need more time. And I get why people wouldn't be open to that explanation. But if Ron went to Dan and said that, and said, I know that, this is not going to excite the fan base, we're not going to make big moves this year, but long term, this is the right way to approach it as a franchise, I could be persuaded by that. I guess the risk is then you kick the can down the road, and then it doesn't look any better because you can't get that guy. So like you said, you got to take a shot at some point to prove that you can take a step. But because this year for Washington was just not as open to quarterbacks, I guess, like, I would be probably more sympathetic than most to that idea of pushing it down the road and trying to say, hey, when we're going to take this shot, we have to take the shot like Buffalo did with Josh Allen.
And that's fine. And I think what I said last year too is I would get as much draft capital in the next draft as I could to then be aggressive. It doesn't work. Now that you have Wentz, you don't have to do that. If you hadn't gotten Wentz, I would have said, get some draft capital for next year to be in position to make an aggressive move. Because otherwise, I think, are you going to get better than Wentz next year or the year after? We don't know that. So they had a chance to get that guy now, which is why, and again, like, it's if he goes out and plays pretty well, just if he's 16th in the league, then that salary is okay. But he's got to be in that range where you can get some top 10 games and you're going to get some bottom 10 games. But you've got to be in that area where you say, okay, at least he's a top half guy, because otherwise then it's going to be okay, but I would, like, Sam, there was a point this offseason where I thought that's what they were going to do, where you get the Trubisky and you keep building out around Trubisky with another free agent. Or all your draft picks, and then get aggressive and go next year. So there was a point where I thought that was where they were going to go, and I don't know, but I guess this is where they went. So
it just, to me, I guess, like, what is the end goal? Like, for me, Carson Wentz, the ceiling probably is being really competitive in the conference. And hoping to, I know for a franchise that has won one playoff game in many years, like, we're asking a lot here, but, like, being competitive in the conference and saying, hey, like, let's go to the conference title game. To me, is Carson Wentz a guy that can carry you deep in the playoffs? I guess, like, we'll have to see.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, being consistently competitive, winning double-digit games a year, like basically for Carson Wentz's tenure in Washington, knowing what we know now, like, what is success?
Well, and I think this is why, first of all, this is why you get the receiver in the first round. It's why you take the other running back to give, and now you've got to go out and still, I think, get a little bit more on that offensive line to protect him and give him every opportunity to maximize that. And it's why you don't go get a quarterback in the second round to then maybe say, wait a minute, you just got me. Why are you doing that? So I think there is that. And I think the other thing, though, here, because they haven't won in a while, like, I go back, one of the guys that Ron Rivera talks to a lot is Andy Reid. One of the things Andy Reid did when he got to Kansas City was go out and get Alex Smith. At that time, Alex Smith was not thought of as this great savior for an organization. He was thought of as a middle of the road guy. Andy Reid, they maximized Alex Smith to an extreme, and he did well for them. And there were things he did well that they capitalized on. And then they won. And then, even when they were coming off a 10 or 11 win season, they'd get aggressive to get Mahomes because that was the guy they wanted. So I think this at least gives you the chance to be successful. And in a couple of years, if it's just like, this guy's taken us as far as he can, you got to go be aggressive to get somebody else. And can you do that? I think the key there is not so much can you get the guy, can you identify the right guy? Because Kansas City did. Not everybody thought Mahomes. If Mahomes was viewed that way, the Bears are taking him, right? There's a bunch of teams ahead of him. So to me, it's like, not just can you get him, can you identify him? And that's what the Chiefs did exceptionally well. But that's a guy that Ron talks to a lot. And, so, hey, get your quote unquote Alex Smith. And not saying he's Alex Smith, but again, Wentz does some things well that Alex Smith did not. Alex Smith protects the ball, but he was never a big time passer, right? So I think from that standpoint, and then if you're Snyder, you look at the stadium, they're not selling tickets, not enough. You just changed the name. You need to generate some excitement. And you hear this offseason how people don't want to come here because they don't win. So you've got to, I wonder how much that plays into, you have to change the mindset as well. Whether or not Carson Wentz is going to be that guy for 5 years, but for the next couple, can he get you from here to here? Where
So
they haven't won 10 games in a row in back-to-back years since the early 90s. I mean, they've got, you know what I mean? Like, this is an incredible run of ineptitude, and that has to change at some point.
So to me, it sounds like we're saying the not best case scenario, but a reasonable hope for this team, for Carson Wentz, is that he establishes a high floor, a baseline of competency that you can be in contention to have a winning record every year. You can be in the mix to go to the playoffs, and establishing that level of competitiveness then allows you to say either we are going to identify the guy who can maybe raise our ceiling, and if we can get to a Super Bowl competitor, we want to view Carson Wentz as, at best, a really good bridge.
Right. And I think a bridge, and a bridge without necessarily the heir apparent on the roster right now, because for the next couple of years, I mean, Carson Wentz has played well enough to do, even the Eagles a couple of years ago, he was doing pretty well. So, and I know that we all know the red flags. We know the issues, the flaws, not a perfect quarterback. But the other thing we've seen, Sam, too, is, like, for example, what if in a couple of years, a quote unquote Russell Wilson type becomes available, and they look at Washington, you know what? Washington's won 10, 11 games with Carson Wentz. Look at that defense. Look at this. Maybe I can be the difference there. Maybe that makes it more enticing to come here versus a guy. And I don't know why, we don't know all the reasons Wilson didn't want to come here, but what we do know is they haven't won in 5 years, a winning record, and they haven't been a threat in the playoffs in a long time. So establish that, and maybe, let's say, in a couple of years, Joe Burrow is a free agent, and he looks like, you know what? I love Terry McLaurin. I Chase Young. Those are my guys. They tell me how great, So I think there are ways that you can, there's so many quarterbacks becoming available that if you can, you have to start winning at some point. And that's why, like, this year, like, I'll be honest, as a reporter watching these games, I don't want to go through another year watching a bad offense, which is what we have done for too many years. And it's really boring. And I feel bad for the fans because they got to pay for those seats. But, right? I mean, like, selfishly, I want to see a good offense. And I think once again, but more so than that, for the fans, they need to see the wins. Players need to see that to say, okay, this thing is developing. And again, maybe in a couple of years, you win 10 games this year, 10 or 11 next year, you win a playoff game, but Wentz is then somebody else might say, I can be the guy there. I don't know. That's just one way. That, to me, that's the optimum way for them. That's the positive spin for them, I guess.
Right. And I would say that this strategy of identifying, hey, this is the best we can do right now, and we got to go get them, sort of falls in line with the NFL that we've seen this season, right? Teams are getting more aggressive, whether it be, right, Vegas or Miami, pushing hard for their top wideouts, whether it be the the absolute arms race in the AFC West. Really interesting points that I think Rams COO Kevin Demoff made in an article that I read. Like, he was like, I think that risk and aggression in the NFL for a long time was probably too low. And so, right, trading some of these first round picks, which are still, relative uncertainties, relative coin flips, for veterans, which the Ravens have done, which the Rams have done, which the Patriots have done, is, that was sort of a mark inefficiency. And I think you're seeing teams get more aggressive this offseason. So if the league is calibrating that way, then the Wentz trade makes even more sense in my mind, because you got to do something.
Right. And I think the other thing along with that, guy, first of all, NFL teams and coaches are slow to, become that way. For all the, Ron's monikers, Riverboat Ron, coaches tend to be conservative in their thinking by and large, as far as, well, you don't go out and get a quarterback here, but the quarterbacks are lasting longer. Guys who take care of themselves, receivers are lasting longer if they take care of themselves. But it does, I think, with the money and all that, like, a lot of guys become available the last couple of years. You'd say, oh, they'd never trade player X, and player X is out of there. AJ Brown, before his second contract, traded. Are you kidding me? Tyreek Hill, Watson has his own issues, but even before the off-field stuff, he wanted out of there and he was going to be traded at some point. So you look at all that, and it's like, who's going to become available in a couple of years if Wentz doesn't work out, that maybe you can then go get. And, maybe it's Daniel Jones. I don't know. I'm kidding, folks. I was like, some people are just like, what? I'm going to unsubscribe here right now. No, I'm kidding, folks. But, it's like, you don't know who becomes available in a couple of years. So try and get what you can now, and then worry in 2 years. All right, we don't have that guy. So now let's go find another guy who might be that guy. So, I don't know. I just think the way the NFL has gone, it's really, it has changed, and they are being more aggressive, and players are being more aggressive at pushing their way out because they have more power, because they have so much money. All right. You don't want to pay me $30 million, and I tried that with ESPN. You don't want to pay me $30 million. I'm out. And they said, we're going to deduct we're going to push that period to the left a few more spots, and you're going to take it, son. So here I am. But seriously, there's so much more money that I think it allows teams to be aggressive, or makes teams be aggressive, and makes players understand that they have some power here too, and can get out if they want to.
I think, you kind of brought that up earlier with the Joe Burrow, hypothetical, which, I hope people don't run with and keep in context. But Terry McLaurin and Chase Young telling him, hey, we're a competitive team, even with Carson, like, you could come here and you could raise the ceiling. Like, that is important. I mean, you see it more in the NBA, but I think you're seeing it a lot in the NFL, even this offseason. Like, player empowerment is real. I think it's coming. And so that is going to be, like the Packers, I think in the past, like, you could have just told Devonta Adams, we franchise tag you, you have to play on it. But he was able to force his way out. So that is very real. And I think that showing like what your locker room thinks and showing that progress, and then having, I guess, like, quasi recruitment again, is totally, I think, going to be a real thing, and another reason why you got to take that step forward.
There you go, Sam. I've kept you long enough. You need to go take a nap. I know you're tired. You got up early. It was like 11 o'clock or whenever it was. So I know you need a nap. So 11 o'clock. I call that dinner. So
we Keim said 10:30, and I slept through 2 alarms, and so we started at 11. So that I I appreciate you for outing me.
There you go. Thanks, Sam. That was awesome.
Of course. Thanks, Keim.
Hey, everybody, it's John Keim. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and I'll continue to bring you guests who provide excellent insight into the Washington Commanders. And while you're here, check out the other terrific content on the Ampire Media Network, including Inside the Cap with Joel Corey and All's Caps with Steve Wino and former Washington Capital Carl Alsner. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Thank you.